All right, this is our pseudo BC calculus class. We're on lesson 2-2. This is take 2 on lesson 2-2. It would be awesome if it was also February 2nd, but it's March the 3rd. So we got 22233 happening. 2020. Our objective today is to do what, Andrea, again?
Take the derivative of inverse function.
All right, let's see if we can actually do this better now. Chris, can you please find a seat? All right, so this is a review. If I have an outer function and I have an inner function and I take the derivative, what do you get? And I've been saying this over and over again, so it should be nice and easy with a quiet raised hand. Outer and an inner turns into what? Oh no, that's not good. By the lack of raised hands, I think we need to review unit 2. It's always, you take the derivative of this one first. How do I pronounce that?
But the derivative of that.
Yeah, the derivative of that. So the derivative of outer. So daughter times inner. But remember that daughter still has the inner of it. So daughter of the inner times dinner of that same x. So daughter times dinner. It simplifies as daughter times dinner, but remember the inner isn't touched on that first go round. And a lot of textbooks will say, okay, if you take the derivative with respect to x of v of u of x, they boil it down into this nice small little formula, but it, I don't know, you can choose and pick whichever one you like. This is v prime of u of x times u prime of x. So whichever formula you prefer, I like saying daughter times dinner, but if you don't like that catchphrase and you say, no, it's v prime of u of x times u prime of x.
Times x prime?
Well, I assume that x is x, so yes, times 1, sure. You can say that, but there it is. There's your basic chain rule. And again, if you don't know, or if you talk to someone at college and you're like, oh, don't you know how to do daughter times dinner? They'll be like, what? But if you say, hey, do you remember how to use chain rule? And you're like, oh, that's this. This is chain rule that I'm teaching you right here, or reviewing with you, hopefully. Can I get a fist of 5 since I had so few responses? How well do you remember chain rule? How remember? Okay, I'm getting 5s and 4s from most people. James, you need to put it down so you can take notes and give me a fist of 5 since you did not give me a fist of 5. James, what do you got? 4? Okay, I couldn't see you because you were holding that. All right, so here is the formula that you're going to be using over and over again. So first, let's assume that g and h are inverse functions of one another. That means if I apply g to a function and then h to that same function, I undo it. So let's say I have h of x is equal to some number that I don't know. But I can undo h of x by taking g of that h of x. So g of h of x will undo it. G and h kind of cancel each other out, and I'm left with a quiet raised hand, g of x, exactly. This is the definition that is given everywhere of an inverse function. If I take g of h of x, they undo each other. You can even, in your notes, say, yes, they cancel each other out, and I'm left with x. But we don't want to just cross them out because we want to use this as the definition and actually take the derivative of both sides. So let's take the derivative of the left-hand side. So I'm now going to say d, let me do a different color here. If I'm saying d dx of that side, and maybe I should move this a little bit over, sorry about that, and d dx of this side, the derivative of both sides with respect to x. Oh, hey, Mr. Sindel just reviewed daughter times dinner because look, I have an outer and I have an inner. That might come in handy. So if I take the derivative of g of h of x, Gio,
what
do I get?
What?
Oh, if I take, I thought you were going to tell us that left-hand side.
Oh, no.
Okay.
What was your question?
How do I take the derivative of g of h of x? And I just kind of wrote it down up above here.
Yeah,
Go for it, yeah.
G prime
G prime.
of x of h of x
So far so good? Keep going.
times h prime of x.
Times h prime of x. Beautiful. All right, a super hard question for the right-hand side. It's almost impossible to answer. Arrow, what's the derivative of x? It's 1.
You guys made this.
Play nice. I like having a nice classroom.
Stego's being really.
No, I think Stego is trying to enforce the niceness.
Push me down the stairs.
All right, and then we're done. We're basically done. Do you guys see it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Almost. It's the same thing that we defined on the first take. All I have to do now is just get rid of this thing. Move that to the other side. So I say divide both sides by this g prime of h of x on both sides. So divide that side by g prime of h of x. And when I do that, I get my formula. And this is kind of important, so remember it. H prime of x, like assuming I gave you g of x, if I want to find the derivative of the inverse, so if I gave you g, h is the inverse, well, to find the derivative of that inverse, it's 1 over g prime of h of x. Start, box it, circle it a bunch of times, add cool flames.
If you wrote that in terms of f and like f prime and f inverse, what would it look like? Just how it was before?
If you change that to an f, then that changes to f inverse function of x.
Remember that is the g f prime?
So, I don't know, what did you define in your function? What is your hf or is your gf?
I'm just trying to make it so like that formula there is like the same as the one inside yesterday.
Okay, so the one that is, I gave the textbook one yesterday.
Yeah.
So the textbook one yesterday looks like this. The derivative d dx of f inverse function of x looks like this. It's 1 all over, so if I'm taking the derivative of the inverse, that means if h and h, you can tell both here, h and h are the inverse functions. So on the inside, I should have f to the negative 1 of x. And then on the outside, I should be doing normal function. So this is the normal non-inverse, and I have to take the derivative of that. So normal non-inverse is just f, and I take the derivative. So that's the comparison between the two right there.
Okay. Yeah, got it.
Again, you don't need to write down that yellow function. I realized it was kind of too complex. I like the blue one better. It's simpler, easier to understand, in my opinion at least. Because you don't get the notation with inverse at all. But you might see that on the test, not my test, but the AP test. All right, so let's see an example that I actually know how to solve. So I'm giving you a function, there it is. G is equal to that polynomial. Okay, h is the inverse of g. One is the opposite of the other. And I'm going to point out kind of a cool thing. If I plug in 4 into g, if I do all the math, I'll do the math for you. Hey, it's 5. You're welcome. It'll be helpful because, look, I'm going to somehow use a 5 later. I didn't give you that for a random reason. I don't say, notice that 1 happens to be negative, I don't know, negative 4.75. It's useful. Okay, so define our function. Write out this formula again, and maybe you'll have to use slightly different notation because we have g and h. Oh, we have the same functions, g and h. So I can write out the same exact formula because they're the same exact letters. I'm given a function of g, and I need to find the derivative of its inverse. How do I find the derivative of its inverse? So again, I get to copy paste this. Haha, sorry guys, you guys have to rewrite it. Technology, it's lovely.
Why don't we get cool little tablets?
I've been wanting them for a long time, but I don't know. It's a lot of money.
Like, think about it. What if, Gio got one?
So, on a slight tangent here, we could pay less money, switch all of our laptops, well, in the years to come, switch to Surface Pro 3s, which are writable, but it's a Windows platform instead of Mac. And you save money, and it's, I don't know, which one is used more? College, maybe you use Macintosh more. What's the question?
Would it work with the robots?
It would also work with the robots, and we wouldn't have to natively do anything else to it. Yeah, there's a lot of nice things about it.
Why can't we do that?
Because it requires all the teachers that have already learned one system to learn a different system.
You just barely got it.
Probably doesn't even know how to use the app.
And it's not just one teacher at our school. It's if we switch at this school, we probably have to switch at the entire district because all of a sudden we're like, wait, now Miss Soule, who is in Colville, has to use a different application for her testing software than we do, and it's all of this disjointed. So it's going to be a district decision that
So we
happens.
can't just all get little cool little pads like what you have?
I Oh yeah, so if you just want to buy these, yeah, it's only like $100. You guys can buy it on your own. It would be really
Wait,
cool.
so you're telling me if I bought that on my own, I could do my notes how you're doing them, right?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, Gio, if you want to bring in your tablet and do notes like I am, that's fine.
Yeah.
It's a little bit weird and off-putting to have a tablet off to the side that I can't physically look at my tablet to see where I'm drawing. I just have to be like, I'm right about
Well, you're
there
like an expert
and there
by
and
that.
there. Well, yeah, practice makes perfect, right? I should really show you guys the first video I ever did on this thing. It is atrocious. My handwriting, garbage. Yeah, practice is perfect. I'll show you guys later. This is too much of a tangent. Let's come back to the lesson. Let's fill in what we know. What do we know? We know our x. Hey, there it is. It's 5. So I come back down here and I say our new function looks like this. We're trying to find h prime of 5. H prime of 5. We have transformed this. So I'm going to do an arrow here, or as a clear. So h prime of 5 is equal to 1 over g prime of h of, well, we know it's 5 now.
Hey, shh, don't say that.
So far, so good. Gio, Andrea, we're taking notes. We're good.
No, I just
Has everyone written this orange/yellow colored writing down?
I wrote it before you wrote it.
Oh, wow, that's impressive. But are you telling the truth? So from here, I need to figure out what is h of 5, and that's kind of a harder question, and that's what I gave you right here. So when I say g of 4 is equal to 5, the inverse function, the inverse is h of, if I switch my x and y values, again, this is my y value, so 5 is my y value. I can say that 4 is the x value. I'm going to switch that, and I'm going to say h of 5 is the same thing as 4. It's embedded in that information. That's the definition of an inverse function. I'm allowed to switch these values, and that is the inverse function. So write it down in your notes. You're going to be doing this over and over again on the homework as well. If I switch these values, that is the inverse function. That's the definition that we learned yesterday that maybe I should have included in the notes again today, but there it is. So I know what h of 5 is. I can come down here and say, hey, this h of 5 is that h of 5, which means this h of 5 is 4. So let's cross it off and say that's 4. So I really have 1 over g prime of 4. G prime of 4. Well, I have g. Let's zoom out here. I have g. It's right there. If I take the derivative and plug in 4,
Wait.
I'm done. Again, so making sure everyone follows me. I need to find g prime. Well, there's g. Take its derivative.
Too much work.
I know, they're a bit of work. Sorry to make you guys learn, but here it is. We're going to take the derivative of each of these 3 terms. Here we go. Here's our scratch work down here.
Oh, wait, that is example.
G prime of x is equal to what? I need Aquarius hand to take the derivative of those 2 terms. You don't have to do the third one because it's a constant.
Which one?
Gio, you're a master. I need to give it to someone that will build their confidence up, that will get it correct, or I'll help them get it correct. Yes, Teflon, she's up. She's ready to go.
Wait. That hurt.
You got this, Teflon.
Just the X part or the whole?
Take the derivative of all that.
I don't know.
You got this. 3 comes down in front, right?
D.
3/4 x to the 3/4 x to the second. Keep going.
Minus 2.
Minus 2.
And then 0.
And that's 0. Yeah, so done. All right, so Teflon has successfully taken the derivative. Thank you. And we're going to plug in what now? What am I trying to do?
4.
Oh, 4. With Aquarius hand, tell me why I'm plugging in 4. I want to make sure that everyone's following here. Oh, yes, James. Why are we plugging in 4? Well, isn't that a 5 right there? Why are we plugging in 4 if that's a 5? Down there.
Yeah. Change it to.
Ah, yeah, so it's the 4. All right, so here we go. My scratch work, I'm going to do it in a different color now. So I'm going to say here now, g prime of 4 is equal to 3/4 times 4 squared minus 2. All right, so I should probably do 4 quantity squared minus 2. All we're doing is everywhere that you see an x, just that one spot, you're turning that into a 4. All right, so let's do some mental math. Here we go. Ready? 4 squared. 16 divided by 4. And that 4 that you found from all of this stuff times 3 is 12 minus 2, 10.
11.
He's like,
That's equal to 10. Which means our final answer here is 1 over 10.
Mr. Sindel, is that G prime of 4 or is that G prime times 4?
G prime of 4.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
you know, I'm a little confused on this.
So again, everything is embedded because the way that this formula works out is all I'm doing is I'm taking inner of the outer. This doesn't mean G prime times this. This is G prime of this. This came from all the way back up here. If I'm taking the derivative, this is G of H of X. So G prime of H of X. All comes from the beginning. All right, so let's try another one. I want to see if you guys can do this. I'm going to circulate the room. Work with someone else if you would like. This is the same problem that we had from the previous notes that you should have recycled by now. See if you can do this. All right, so I'm going to go through this nice and slow. Tell me to slow down if I'm going too fast. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to write down my formula. And this is a formula that you're going to have to memorize. My formula. I'm trying to find G prime, so my G prime of X will go on the left.
What are you talking about?
It's going to be 1 divided by the opposite of G, which is H prime of the inside, so G of X. So notice that this letter and this letter always match up, but then the derivative is always on the outside and it's the opposite. And again, if you don't know how to get here, if you think about the process, how did we get that? You can rederive it. It's like 2 steps. As long as you know that G of H of X is equal to X, we did 2 steps to get there. It's a 2-step derivation. So once we have our formula, then we start plugging in things. What is our X value? It's 3 pi over 2. So I say this is now equal to 1 over, I guess I should say it's a Claire right here. This is equal, this is turning into, it's not an arrow, it's a Claire. Or a Stego, or a James, I don't know. You guys, one day. G prime of 3 pi over 2 is now going to be equal to 1 over H prime of G of 3 pi over 2. All I did was plug in 3 pi over 2 into X. Nothing fancy yet. So far, so good.
Can you fix your line?
My line.
Which line? Like fraction. Oh yeah, the longer. Yeah. There you go.
Okay.
And move the 1 into the center.
Oh, I have to grab it like this. Hold on. There we go.
There you go.
All right.
It bothers me.
Wait, you know how the pressure's going up to the line? Please fix it. Just kidding.
So from here, I need to ask myself, what is G of 3 pi over 2? I only have f of pi over 2. How am I going to get that? Well, it's the reverse of that. I can say the inverse function for this guy means that G of this 3 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, is equal to pi over 2. So this G of 3 pi over 2 will cancel out, and that turns into just pi over 2. I shouldn't say cancel out. It's really being substituted out. So now my new function says this. This is equal to 1 all over, and I still have the h prime on the outside, 1 over h prime of this pi over 2. Pi over 2. Okay, in order to find h prime of pi over 2, I need to first find h prime. What is my... Oh, I used h instead of f. Yikes. Mistake. No one caught it.
Well, I was gonna say so. I was gonna say it too, but you just kept going.
So I thought about it, but then...
Extra credit point, opportunity missed.
Extra credit?
It would have been extra credit.
What?
I don't know why I used h. It's only f here. So f prime of pi over 2. In order to find f prime of pi over 2, I first need to find f prime. So to do that, I'm going to do it off to the side here, my scratch work. F prime of x. I take the derivative of cosine, which everyone will shout out is good, negative sign. And then derivative of 3x is 3. So there is our derivative, and I'm going to plug in pi over 2. So this is going to be equal to still 1 over negative sine of pi over 2 plus 3. Yeah, Gio and I were pretty good. We finished each other's.
Senses.
Stop. You got it. Oh, you heard that?
That means you messed up.
Unless I put some bad words in there.
I actually don't know what that means, so I'll have to trust you, Gio, and get her in trouble. Should I translate it?
Oh. You won't. Ha. No, you have to do it from Spanish to English.
Silly.
No, from Spanish to English.
No, that's not
Dang
how you
it.
spell it, dude.
How do you spell it?
No, you have to do it from Spanish to English.
No, we do.
No, C-A. No, it's C-A. No, C-A-G-O. Right?
How dare you, Andrea? How dare you? In my classroom, under my... So what is pi over 2? Everyone point to pi over 2. Point to pi over 2.
You messed up.
Yeah. Straight up, and then sine is the x or the y coordinate. It's the y coordinate.
Yeah, so
Y coordinate of straight up is 1, so this is negative 1 plus 3. So this is equal to 1 over negative 1 plus 3, which is 1 over 2. Final answer, box it. 1/2.
I'm gonna guess that next time. You said we're gonna guess 0 next time.
Okay. And finally, we have example number 3.
Wait, hold on. That's the right question.
Now this is
1 over 1.5. It's 2? It's 2? Oh, dude.
Yes. Okay. Example number 3. What is h prime of 7 using only letters F and H? Only using F and H. How do I do the formula for h prime of 7? You should be able to do this. Try to do it from memory. Everyone right now, if you haven't done so already, and even if you have done so, do it again off to the side and hold your hand over that piece of paper. Do this from memory. Try saying, okay, h prime of 7, that's going to be equal to what? H prime of 7. I'm going to do it silently, and you can check your work. It should be using only letters F and H. And now check your work. Did you get it right?
Yes, sir.
Did I get it right?
I know. Thank God.
All right. Here we go.
Chris,
So, what is h of 7? Well, hey, there's 7, and if I plug that into that h, then I get this value of negative 3. So, this is now 1 over f prime, Chris, of negative 3. Because we knew that h of 7 was negative 3 from our table. And hey, I know what f prime of negative 3 is also. There's f prime. I plug in negative 3, I get a half. So the answer is a half, right? Haha, good, you got it.
Wait, why is it?
Because it has a 1 on it.
So I still have the 1 on the top. F prime of negative 3 is a half. So what is 1 divided by a half? I can ask that literally. I can say, what is 1 divided by 1/2? Well, keep it, change it, flip it. So if I keep it,
1, it's just 1.
keep it, change it, flip it, 1 times 2 over 1 is...
2. 4. What?
It's 4. God, you guys.
Wait, how do you get
Oh, I thought you were serious. Wait, actually?
I like bro.
Wait, how do you get 4?
No, it's not.
It's not 4. It's 2.
Wait, that's pretty good. We worked our 70s.
All right. So yesterday on our failed attempt at lesson 2-2, you guys gave me like 2s and 3s. Can you give me a new Fist of 5? How well can you do these types of
Just because there
problems?
was no mistakes, you got 3. I gave you 1 yesterday.
All right. Oh my God! I got my first 4. Another 4. A 3. A 4. A 3. 3. 3. Gio, what do you got?
That's a big.
A 4. Chris, what do you
I
got?
gave you
3. Okay.
To be honest, I shot in the class.
That's better than yesterday. It's improvement. All right, thank you.